So I guess one of the things you highlighted there is physics historically has been very reductive, but to understand to understand living systems, we need to understand emergence, and that the sum of the parts is, well, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes, I think life exemplifies this dictum that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's a very powerful example, and one way of expressing it, I often do, is that no atom in my body is alive, yet I am alive. And now if you're a hard-nosed reductionist, you'll say, oh, well, that's because you're bestowing upon this thing called life a special sort of status, but actually you are nothing but a collection of atoms, and that the fact that some particular collection or arrangement of atoms you choose to call living is entirely an informal thing, but life is not a fundamental aspect of existence. It's simply one particular state or arrangement of particles alongside all of the others, and you're vesting too much significance in it. It's very hard to convince a biologist, for example, that their subject matter is of no particular value compared to any other arrangement of things. So we do think life is rather special. Maybe it's hubris, but I'm convinced that there is something special and significant about life, and it is more than the sum of its parts. So this type of nothing buttery doesn't really help. It certainly is of no practical value to say that if you want to understand what is going on in living organisms, the physics and the chemistry and all the interesting things they do, to say, well, it's all really just atoms interacting with each other, doesn't help you at all. So the reductionist agenda, might please some philosophers to say that the world is nothing but a lot of particles or loops of string or whatever is your fundamental unit, but it's of no real value in science, and I think it's actually fundamentally wrong anyway.
I think in your book there's a great example that you use. How would a biologist fix a radio, or something along those lines? I can't remember the name. Yeah. Could you just talk on that?
Yes. So this is when I think back through my career, you see what has happened is that physics started out 350 years ago, and has been traditionally a very reductionist discipline that we tend to classic example. Particle physics, that we think, well, what is matter, or what's it made of, smash it to bits, see what the components are. And the pinnacle of this quest is the discovery of the Higgs boson a few years ago. And so this follows the tradition that you'll understand something by smashing it into pieces. And that's part of the story. I'm not denigrating what those people do. I think it's wonderful. But it's only obviously one half of the story, because even if you've got all of the fundamental particles listed in a big table, it won't explain why people fall in love or how they vote in elections or anything of that sort. And so that's the other part of the story. Now, physics, I think, in the post-war years began to get away from that extreme reductionism, and there were a lot of fields like chaos theory and complexity theory and in condensed matter physics, lots of work in the opposite direction. You might think of that as emergent phenomena or synthetic phenomena, where parts come together and produce something new and exciting. And the whole field of self-organization, self-organizing systems became very big in the 70s and 80s. So physics sort of got away from it, but meanwhile, biology, that was on a roll after Schrodinger's little book triggered the industrialization of molecular biology. It's now a major industry. The molecular biology became very reductionistic too. And so there was a tendency to think that everything in life could be explained by looking at what was going on the molecular level. And the high watermark of that was the Human Genome Project. There was a feeling, well, all we need to do is sequence the human genome and we'll solve all the world's problems, we'll have cures for all the diseases and so on, because it'll all be there on the DNA. It was always going to be a nonsense. You just count the number of base pairs in DNA and look at the complexity of a living organism. They clearly don't match up. So there's much more going on than just at that bottom level. But that spirit of, we've got something baffling, a living cell or something, how do we explain it? Well, let's try smashing it up and seeing what's inside, and maybe figure it out. And there is this wonderful story. It's an account written by a Russian geneticist, I believe he was, who was engaged for a long while in working out a particular type of biochemical machinery. But this is a sort of spoof on how you would go about, and how many biologists do go about thinking about a complicated component in a living cell. And he uses transistor radio. I don't know how many of our young listeners even know what a transistor radio is. When I was a schoolboy, I built one of these things, or a friend of mine built it, and I helped. So we understood how you could you buy these transistors, which were little switches basically, and solder them all together and get this radio to work. So it's all wonderful. So these things would have, I don't know, 50 components or something in total. And so the story is that this Russian biologist's wife had a transistor radio that was broken, and said, could he fix it? And how would a biologist go about fixing it? And so you might imagine, well, you take the back off and you'd note that there are some colored things inside. These would be the transistors. They used to be color-coded, you see, and some would be red and some would be blue and some would have stripes and so on. So the first thing you might do is, well, let's remove one of those and see if it makes it better or worse, or let's swap two of them, transpose them and see if that makes a difference. You go on like that. Or what about, you fire a bullet through, and does that improve it or make it worse? And which bits seem to be vital? And that's precisely the way that biologists go about trying to understand what's going on in living organisms. But he makes the point, which is that any competent radio engineer would know immediately what to do. They'd listen to it, oh, the sound's all distorted or something, we need to replace this bit or retune that bit. And that's because the radio engineer would understand the principles of the transistor radio, the principles of radio control. And we don't understand the principles of life. If you understood what makes the cell tick in terms of its overall principles, and how not just the components, but how the whole lot is put together in a coherent, integrated manner. If you understood those principles, then you could fix defects. And I have this dream. I've worked quite a bit recent years in cancer research. I have this dream that we'll be able to tackle the cancer problem in that sort of way, that we'll understand that there is, we think of cancer as in terms of physical hallmarks, and there's some very familiar ones like uncontrolled proliferation and cell motility and metastasis and evading the immune system and so on. These are all physical traits. But they're also, I think, informational traits, and that's, if you like, software glitches as well as hardware glitches. And just like with computers, you can correct, if you're lucky, you can correct software glitches by downloading a patch or reinstalling a bit of software, or ultimately reinstalling the entire operating system, and then you sort of reboot and fix the problem. That we might be able to tackle diseases like cancer in the same way, instead of just annihilating the cells. Find some way of, if you understand the principles of information management and how that information is being mismanaged in cancer, that we might be able to reconfigure it and get back to the healthy one. That may be pie in the sky. It may be easier to just find a way of annihilating all those cells, but it's a sort of, I think, a more satisfactory approach to say if we can only understand the principles of the software of life in the same way as you can understand the principles of the information processing going on in a radio, you're more likely to be able to fix a problem or understand what's going on than just sort of looking at the components and hoping you'll get some